Hello, everybody. I'm Marcos Molitzis. I'm here with Carrie Eleveld. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Coast's The Brief, our weekly show about politics. Today, we're going to be talking about the Republican Party's embrace of autocracy, anti-democracy, because they've surrendered the battle of ideas. We're also going to have, at the top of the hour, we're going to have Amanda Littman of Run for Something, an organization that came out of the Trump resistance to help young candidates, predominantly of color, to run for state-level offices. And they've been fantastically successful in helping diversify the ranks of candidates and creating a Democratic Party that is more reflective of not just the Democratic Party itself and its base, but of America itself. So we're going to be talking to Amanda at the top of the hour on her organization's plans for this fall's state-level elections. We got them in Virginia and a couple of other states. And also, of course, I think we're going to be talking about 2022 because, Carrie, it's going to be the most important election of our lifetime again.
Again!
Again.
It never gets old. Let's do it again.
And I'm not being trite. I'm not making a joke. It literally is the most important election. And yes, they all are, because Republicans at this point have surrendered trying to win hearts and minds. And what they're doing instead is trying to rig the system to eliminate democracy. And it's not hyperbole. It's not me exaggerating. Carrie, I think I wrote about it, maybe even. But Republicans used to talk about America being a center-right country. And we used to be like, yeah, you're so full of crap, because it wasn't. If you looked at the polling, but at least they pretended to try to win the battle of hearts and minds of American people. They've completely surrendered that now, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's only two things there's two things they've got going for elections next year, and that is they're going to stoke culture issues, racism, anti-LGBTQ, every phobia that they can tickle, they're gonna try and gin that up, right? So, but then the other thing, of course, is that they're trying to figure out ways that they can both on the front end and the back end of elections dictate the outcome. So obviously restricting as much access to the ballot box on the front end, and then in certain states like Arizona and Georgia. And I'm not even sure, I haven't even read all of what they're trying to do in Texas. I know it's heavily focused on trying to reduce participation in Houston in particular. Right. But in Arizona and Georgia, they've also got like a back end safety where they're trying, Georgia's already done it, stripped, power from the Secretary of State. And in Arizona, they're trying to do the same thing. So if they don't like how the Secretary of State is, for instance, handling a recount, the GOP-led state legislature can just insert themselves in that process. They can just remove them. They, in Georgia, they've stripped the Secretary of State from those powers from that person permanently. And in Arizona, they're trying to do it just for the rest of the term of Katie Hobbs, the Democrat who's this current Secretary of State, right? Because she's been a total badass. Okay. And, and they are tired of that. And so they're trying to fix it so that she can't defend the state against lawsuits, and that her powers are diminished for the rest of her term through 2023. So, they have a front end and a back end safety in many cases. And this is, I mean, honest to God, Democrats are trying to do the normal thing, which is to create good policy that is backed by roughly 2/3 of the country in most cases for Biden's agenda, and then run on that next year, right? In order to turn people out who will hopefully be, enthused by these policy changes. And Republicans are trying to do the exact opposite, which is just only pick the voters they want who get to go to the polls and cast a ballot. And it is a, you know, it's nothing new, but it keeps getting worse. You know, their block of the commission, the January 6th commission, that's just another cover up. They don't want us to know. They don't want Americans to know all of what went into that, what kind of role Trump may have played, what kind of role congressional Republicans may have played. So, you know, the whole thing is a clamp down on democracy. Everything they are doing is intended to obstruct democracy on the front end, on the back end, in terms of the information people have to work with, et cetera.
Yeah, as an example, in the Texas law that was blocked by Democrats temporarily. This thing will probably pass in a special session later on this summer, but at least for now, it was blocked by Democrats. And one of the provisions, just as an example of how Republicans are undermining democracy, is that on Sunday early voting, they limit the hours between 1 p.m. and I think 6 p.m. The reason that's significant is because Sunday is sold to the polls. It's when Black voters, as an organizing tool, head out from after church and then go and vote in mass as a group. Now, churches, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, they get out at 11, they get out at 12. They are purposefully making it harder for these people to just, as a group, go out and vote. They're making them wait, again, in line. And they're doing the whole thing where you can't give people water while they're waiting in line, right? Everything is designed to make it harder for core Democratic constituencies, predominantly communities of color and young people, because a lot of that is making it harder to vote at college campuses, because those are core Democratic constituencies. And then on the other end, you have, of course, the rise of the Q, Trump, conspiracy theory right. And this is, I think, the reason that Republicans blocked the 1-6 commission. I don't think they're afraid of what's going to come out, because everybody knows what's going to come out. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
I think they are. I think they are afraid. I think more could come out. I really do.
And maybe, yeah. But it would be, to me, anyway, it'd be easy to sort of throw away anybody. Oh, Matt Gaetz met with Proud Boys before, or Lauren Boebert, or Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, these are not people that are particularly beloved in that caucus anyway. It's that fear that Trump's going to then say mean things. And
well, sure.
I still. Again, we talk about this every week because I still haven't cracked the code, and I don't think anybody has. Is why they're so afraid of a Donald Trump that has no platform. He's been deplatformed, has led them to lose the House, the Senate, the White House. Only the third time a president has lost re-election in a century, and continues to be one of the most unpopular politicians in the country. And I'd say one of, he's not the most, because that crown belongs to Mitch McConnell. He's the most unpopular politician in the country, right? But aside from him, Donald Trump, and yet they are still beholden to this guy that will never show them loyalty. He's actively undermined fundraising efforts by party committees. And it's clear that when 2024 rolls around, he's not going to endorse or anoint anybody that doesn't have a last name Trump, or is otherwise associated with the Trump family, like a Jared Kushner. So I will never understand that, but it's leading them down this very, very dangerous path to autocracy. They're not even pretending to have an ideology anymore. They didn't have a party platform last year. And this is like a little factoid that seems to get forgotten, but shouldn't be forgotten, because parties are about ideas. They didn't even pretend to have ideas anymore. So this is a party that has given up trying to win based on ideas. And like you said, is stoking culture war issues. Some of them are ridiculous, like the Dr. Seuss and the Mr. Potato Head nonsense. Some of that is actually not ridiculous, like the anti-transgender efforts to demonize young people, young transgender people. So this is all they have. And this is what they're going into battle. And again, the question is that going to be enough to bring out that hidden Trump deplorable base that only seems to turn out when Trump is on the ballot? But we don't know if that's going to continue to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, that's their supposed base, right? It's just they're like, I'm always baffled when I think about what they're trying to do. I mean, it's no mystery at this point. but it's stunning, and it's partly stunning in its brazenness. So, for instance, when you described what the Texas lawmakers are tried to do and are poised to probably still do in a special session, right? Some of those provisions were things that got knocked out of the Georgia law on the way to them codifying that into law, the Georgia bill on the way to it being codified into law. I think they managed to get rid of the souls to the polls thing. Some of the worst stuff that was in the Georgia bill, they managed to get root out of there. And it's partly maybe because of corporate players had some influence on the front end, and also activists were up in arms. And so even after Georgia did this, and, the Major League Baseball pulls out, and there's uproar across the country, and corporations are making statements, and, law firms are saying they're going to do pro bono work, against these suits. Even after that, then Texas comes back with an even more restrictive law. And the point of making an example out of a Georgia is to try to get other lawmakers to say, gee, maybe that's not the best idea for our state. Well, Georgia lawmakers did it anyway. And, maybe they're just too daft to get it, but I don't think that's really true. I just think they are freaking brazen. And they decided this is what they were going to do. They didn't care if they were going to lose, state revenues in the millions, in the tens of millions, and in some cases, hundreds of millions. And they just went ahead and did it. So it's just brazen. It's not even, they're not even trying.
Well, part of the problem there is that a lot of the economic fallout is going to fall on Atlanta, which is represented by Democrats, right? Like Marjorie Taylor Greene's district way up in Northwest Georgia. They're not going to, any boycott's not going to affect them. No.
Look, a Republican Party, I get your point, but I'm going to say this. A Republican Party that was trying to win would be trying to win the suburbs in bigger numbers in Atlanta. And they're not. You know what I mean? Like, you want the suburbs, and they've lost the suburbs in Houston, and they've lost, I mean, not entirely, but they've had fallout, is what I should say. Big fallout in suburbs in Houston, and fallout in suburbs in Dallas too. And those are important things in Texas, in some of these, in some of the congressional seats and whatever. But in Georgia statewide, which is now, a state that could kind of go either way, if you were trying to win by increasing, you would not be doing anything that upset the suburbs, because you would be trying to increase your vote in those areas, right?
It goes back to the whole idea that they've given up on trying to win votes.
Yes.
And at this point, they're just trying to suppress votes. You know what's crazy about Texas? There's something particularly just incredible about Texas. The first two examples here you talk about that have done restrictions are Georgia and Arizona. These are two formerly solidly red states that really quickly became purple states. In a matter of just a couple cycles, suddenly, boom, they're both like evenly matched on a razor's edge. So there's a thinking in their part, I assume, that, okay, if we can suppress like 2 to 3% of their vote, doesn't take much, just a little bit, we can actually win those states back. That's got to be their thinking. Texas, on the other hand, Donald Trump won Texas by 6 points, right? This is a state that Republicans still win, is still lean Republican. So what does that say about the Republican Party's confidence in themselves and their ideology and their party in a Trump Republican state that has Republican elected officials top to bottom, has big Republican majorities in the state legislature, a lot of it because of gerrymandering, but still, it's a red state, and they're passing these restrictive voting laws. And that's because they know they're losing the demographic battle. They know they're losing the suburbs, and they see the trends. I mean, Barack Obama lost to Mitt Romney by 16 points in Texas. Hillary Clinton lost it by 9. Joe Biden lost it by 6. It's coming down cycle per cycle. I mean, you had Beto O'Rourke only lose the Senate race by 1 point.
Right.
So these are numbers that they're watching, and they're thinking, oh, we don't want to become the next Arizona, the next Georgia. And they're not thinking, how do we win back the suburbs that we're losing?
Right.
It doesn't
And
even
so,
cross their minds, apparently.
right. So arguably what they're doing in Texas is trying to lock it in before they lose those demographics, right? Before, arguably, if you want to make the anti-democracy argument, which is clearly what they're doing, then then in Texas, right, is that you go ahead and you try to lock this in, you try to suppress the vote, you try to lock in your power before you lose it so that you can just continually lock it in. In Arizona and Georgia, what they're doing is just stupid, in my opinion, because they're already in that purple place. And they're one of the things that Republicans are steadily losing more of is the suburban vote. And Maricopa County in Arizona is like, that like makes or breaks you in the state. And so, to be doing anything that is pushing away the suburbs, and the suburbs are not white. They're much more diverse than what Republicans like to think of them as, right? And what a lot of Americans still think of them as. They're much more diverse than that. The other thing is, and I haven't really gotten into this yet, but I do want to look at it. I saw a Pew Research Center graphic. And when you look at voter participation, right, I think in midterms, the people who have college degrees and postgraduate degrees tend to vote in like the 80th percentile and up, whereas people who vote who are more working class, middle class, might not have a college degree and whatever, they are much lower in terms of their percentage of participation. Now, it's obviously a bigger number, but in the midterms, in particular, I would think that you would not want to alienate people who are likely in the 80% percentile and up to show up at the ballot box, right? That's a demographic that is much more likely to show up at the ballot box in the midterms, partly because of privilege. But because of the jobs they have allow for it, whatever, the flexibility. But you wouldn't want to alienate the very voters who are most likely to show up at the ballot box. That is like totally shooting yourself in the foot.
They've completely given up worrying about who's being alienated and who isn't being alienated. All that matters is that Papa Trump is being properly worshipped. At this point, it's become a cult of personality. It's so freaking weird. I don't understand these people. Tom from Facebook has a question. Tom Breuer from Facebook. He asks, how concerned do you think we should be that Republicans at various levels will simply refuse to certify Democratic victories? Carrie, how concerned are you?
Concerned. Super concerned.
100% concerned.
Yeah, totally concerned. Listen, we were talking about this in Slack today. You got people like on the right side of the spectrum, Bill Kristol, saying we should be concerned about autocracy and a potential dictatorship. I can't remember exactly what his tweet was, but he was promoting a piece that was talking about this very issue. We should be concerned. Here is, and I wrote a piece over the weekend on Saturday saying it's never too early to invest in 2022. Okay. Early money is good money. Early activism is good activism. And I don't want anyone to leave this conversation feeling like they don't have agency. You can go to that piece that I wrote, click on my profile at Daily Kos, and you can see, a few stories back. And I outline races that you can already be looking at. And we're going to, in the fall, do a series on, grassroots groups that you can be giving to turn out voter registration. But the point is that we've got a problem both at the state level and at the federal level, where if Republicans manage to have both chambers of Congress coming out of the 2024 elections, I really, really fear for our democracy if a Democrat is elected to the White House, whether or not they would actually certify that person and certify the results of the election. I think that is a very valid worry, and it's not a pants on fire, like, oh, you're way out there. When Bill Kristol and I agree on something.
It feels icky, but it's true. So, here's sort of kind of the bottom line. The bottom line is that Republicans, like we've just talked about, have no interest in appealing to a broader audience. They've given up trying to win on ideas. They're not even throwing out ideas anymore. It's Mr. Potato Head and protect girls sports, code for anti-transgender culture war BS. They're not trying.
Republicans have been big promoters of women's sports since way back. I remember a lot of Republican promotion when I was playing softball and basketball.
Yes.
All that Republican love I got. I just,
So they were so in favor of equal funding for women in collegiate sports, right? So they're not interested in winning any battle of ideas, but they're also not interested in giving up power. And so that is what creates the danger, because they've decided, unfortunately, they have decided that it is easier to subvert democracy than it is to convince people about any of their ideas.
Right.
They're not even trying anymore. So that's why they're doing things like stripping Secretary of States of the power to certify an election, right? Because then they can do their own, quote, investigations, like the sham that we're seeing in Arizona right now, right? It's a joke. But it's a joke right now because it's after everything was certified and we've moved on, right? Next time they'll try that in the middle of an election. When Mark Kelly is up for a regular term, he's a senator that won in a special election, so he's got to run again next year. If the situation hasn't changed in Arizona, Republicans may be able to block his reelection. This is absolutely serious. And that's not even moving forward to 2024 and the shenanigans they may do in what's likely to be another close map. If you look at those 2024 states, 2020 states, nothing's going to change, Carrie. It's going to be the same battleground. They're going to be just as close, and everything's going to hang on that razor's edge, just like it has in 2020 and in 2016.
Yeah, and just to buttress your point about how dangerous the party has become, I actually, and this next election being the next most important election of our lifetime, right, is that Republicans have actually gotten more dangerous since Donald Trump lost. Because instead of just sort of turning a blind eye to his attack on democracy and whatever, they've just taken up the mantle now of attacking democracy themselves. Now, you can say, oh, well, they've always attacked democracy. Yes, they have, but I don't think as overtly, as blatantly, as with as much precision and intention as you see now. And they've actually, I call it fascist precision, the fascist precision with which they are now trying to undermine democracy is really stunning. And, and we all know they had a choice to go a different direction and cut themselves loose of Trump and, retool, figure out how to change some of it. Honestly, they had such an opportunity because Trump had so disrupted what they stood for. Yeah. That they could have actually said, hey, you know what? We got a bunch of options here. Let's pick some of the most popular, things that we can stand for that are just a little bit different from Democrats to, go on a spectrum from totally anti-Democrats to just a little bit different from Democrats and run on that. And they had a chance to do that. And they didn't. And instead now they've just accepted that minority rule is the only way for them to go to maintain power.
Yeah, I could sit there and write a new Republican platform that actually would be more safe for suburban white voters. You could go back to just a little bit of dog whistle racism, a little bit, because suburban whites aren't immune to that. It's just so blatantly obvious right now that it's easier for them to say like, oh yeah, I'm not into that kind of Republican racism, right? But you can, if you were devilish enough, evil enough, you could come up with something that would appeal to Latino voters more on sort of traditional family values and on sort of coded racism. And it could be done, but they don't care. They don't want codes. They don't want to wink anybody anymore. They want that flat out bigotry and racism. Otherwise, what? They're Republicans in name only. They're and
it would take a little innovation. It would take a little innovation. I'm going to do a complete non sequitur here and say something that is like outside of the bounds of what we've normally been talking about. But I listened to a podcast, and I can't remember what it was called. But but one of the points that was made in it was they were talking to a Russian who was, I think, it was all about Russia. It took place in Russia. And they're talking to a young Russian who was saying, I really thought that when the wall came down, that we would become more like you. And instead, it seems like America has become more like us. The Russian disinformation and chaos machine that is now we are living with as a culture, the conspiracy theories, the constant disinformation, whatever. Like we are now struggling with something that Russia struggled with for years, and the Russian state used against its own people for years, disinformation and chaos. Yeah. So, I don't even remember how this related back. I mean, do you remember where I was going? This must be bomb brain. But I have no idea.
It's all relevant to the fact that their Republicans are surrendering on democracy. And it's no accident that Donald Trump worships Putin. He doesn't want to mess with democracy. He doesn't want to mess with elections. He doesn't want to mess with critics. I mean, you think Donald Trump wouldn't love to poison his critics and throw them off balconies, right. Russian style? So this is where the Republican Party is going. Right. And at this point, nobody, even like the most clueless DC pundits, are finally starting to realize that this is what the Republican Party has become. They're not hiding it. Nobody's going to be like, oh, we were bamboozled when a coup. I mean, you had Michael Flynn, who's big Trumpy. He was his national security advisor for some time, who literally just endorsed a coup. Literally said we need one of those coups. And there's a whole Q conspiracy theory floating around that there's going to be a coup in August and Trump will be back in office, as though that is how it works. And to me, it's less about the conspiracy theory and more that there are people who think that's okay because they don't care about democracy. There was this sort of pretense, and now I realize it was all a facade, that all of us as Americans believed in democracy, that we believed in the ideals of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and that we were all, no matter how much we disagreed on tax cuts for millionaires and abortion, at the very least, we can agree that we were going to decide those issues at the ballot box.
Well, it turns out what white people believed was in white democracy. So there's a lot of white Americans who believed in democracy for whites and not for other folks. And that's what we're finding out, right? Because on the edge of a shift in power where whites aren't quite so dominant, white Americans aren't quite so dominant, that's where we lose. All of a sudden they were like, I thought I believed in democracy, but now I don't anymore because I feel disempowered. Or I feel like I'm on the verge of disempowerment. I mean, that's what we're running up against, right? That's why suddenly people who supposedly believed in democracy don't believe in it anymore. They suddenly think that they don't have their privileged position, or they might not have their privileged position. And as long as that's true, we're not gonna be part of democracy.
Yeah, and this is why this leads into, again, the state level elections at the end of this year, in certain states that have these off-year elections like Virginia, and it leads into 2022. I mean, we don't have a choice but to treat this election as an existential threat, not to liberalism. It used to be, yes. Oh no, Mitt Romney wins. If George Bush wins, liberalism is going to suffer. And now we're at the point where the existential threat is the democracy itself. And where America goes, maybe the rest of the world goes. I mean, we're seeing the rise of white nationalist movements or nationalist movements all over the globe.
Yeah, like it or not, we live in interesting times. So buck up.
So is that, let's see.
Yeah.
All right. So Amanda is in the green room. So let's bring her in. So excited to introduce our guest for today. She is Amanda Littman. She is the co-founder of Run for Something. She is the author of the Run for Something book, and she has the Run for Something podcast. This was the easiest introduction I've ever had to make.
Amanda,
welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Amanda, we've been asking this of all our guests, and it's become our favorite question, actually. So, it's basically, can you tell us a little bit about your origin story?
Yeah.
How did you get into activism? And then you can lead into that and how you got into Run for Something.
Of course. So I was born and raised in Northern Virginia, right outside DC. Politics has always been a passion of mine. I don't have like a sob story or some tragic, thing that happened to me. I wanted to make the world a better place. And I thought politics was a really clear way to do that. So when I went to college at Northwestern, my sweatshirt I'm wearing, 'cause it's a little cold today, I got an internship my senior year working for the Obama campaign in Chicago.
Which campaign was that? The presidential?
The reelect.
Okay.
2012.
Yeah.
So my senior year, I was working doing online fundraising and volunteer recruitment on the email team. I was hired before I graduated, took a day off to walk in the graduation ceremony, and then went back to work the next day. Worked through election day, and we won, which was great. Winning is so much fun. I highly recommend it. We should do more of it.
Can't beat it.
Can't beat it. I stayed working for the president at Organizing for Action for about a year. I moved to Florida to work on the Florida governor's race in 2014 for Charlie Crist. I then moved here to New York, where I now live, to work for Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign. So I was her email director, again, doing online fundraising and volunteer recruitment, and worked harder than I ever have in my entire life. Lost that one, as you may recall. Less fun than winning. Don't recommend that. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. About a week after Election Day, I got a Facebook message from someone I went to college with. Hey, Amanda, I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. They keep cutting our budgets. If that guy can be president, seems like anybody can do this. What do I do if I want to run for office? And at the time, I didn't have an answer for him, because if you were young, if you were newly excited about politics, and you wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would answer your call. And that, to me, felt like a symptom of some really big problems in the Democratic Party. So I reached out to a whole bunch of people, one of whom became my co-founder, Ross Morales-Ricchetto. We wrote a plan, we built a website, and then we launched Run for Something on Inauguration Day over 4 years ago. We really thought it would be small. We thought we'd get 100 people who wanted to run in the first year. This would be our side hustle, cool hobby. We had 1,000 people sign up in the first week. As of today, we're up to more than 77,000 young people all across the country who've raised their hands to say they want to run. We've endorsed more than 1,600. We've elected more than 500 young people in 46 states, mostly women, mostly people of color, about 22% LGBTQ+, and they are remarkable. So what was going to be my little side project is now my full-time 200% hustle, and I'm really lucky to get to do it. Really lucky.
One of the things I love about every time we lose a presidential election, the silver lining, don't like losing them, but the silver lining is that it sort of births a whole new, sort of mass of organizations that sort of move the party forward. Mm-hmm. And so after George Bush won in 2000, it sort of birthed the progressive blogosphere. That's sort of Daily Kos's roots back in the day. And they were supercharged when, the Iraq War. And those were dark years, but Move On came out of that, and Daily Kos, and a lot of other sort of netroots online progressive organizations. And with Donald Trump winning, unfortunately, the silver lining again was sort of the rise of the resistance. And Run for Something was definitely a piece of it, and a piece that was sorely missing. I always talk about how the traditional candidate used to be white, male, most likely a lawyer, somebody who had connections to money, and probably odds are a prosecutor. Right? Yep. That was the model, and you helped change that. So can you walk us through? Say I want to run for office. I don't, but say I want to run for office. Somebody listening wants to run for office. What do you have to offer that potential candidate?
Yes. So if you're thinking about running for office, you go to runforwhat.net. You enter your name, your address, your info. We'll show you all of the offices right now in 2021, but in 2022 and beyond, as we get the data, that are available for you to get on the ballot. And it includes the filing deadlines, how much it costs, how much the position pays, all that kind of information. Then you would join a conference call that our staff hosts every week. We walk through the basics of how to get on the ballot, what first-time candidacies are like, all the questions apologies for the dog, all the questions that first-time candidates tend to have. You then have a one-on-one with one of our volunteers. There, it's where we learn a little bit more about you, and our volunteers have some resources that they're available to give you right up front. And we train all of our volunteers with sort of like the basics here. From there, you're part of the Run for Something pipeline. We have guides on how to actually get on the ballot in every state. We have resources and training, some that we run, some that our partners run, with everything from how to write a campaign plan to how to write a budget to how to raise the money for that budget and that campaign plan, all the way through to election day. We have a network of about 500 mentors across the country who will help you one-on-one for free on whatever subject matter you might have a question on. We have a big Slack and Facebook community of all of the candidates that we're working with, so you can ask questions to people going through something similar, and you get to apply for our endorsement. And our endorsement is another application. We want to see your budget, your win number. We do some vetting, and those are the folks that our regional directors work one-on-one with. So after you've been endorsed, our regional director will get on the phone with you and say, what is it that you need? Maybe you need the state party to answer your email. Maybe your field director needs training. Maybe you just need someone to talk to about these vendor pitches that you've been getting and what the right answer is for who to go with for your direct mail firm. Whatever it is, our regional directors are one part consultant, one part coach, one part therapist. You'll also get matched. You'll also get matched to one of our alumni who've gone through something similar. So if you're a college student running in 2020, you'll get matched with a college student who ran in 2018. Wow. And we work you all the way through to election day. So in some places, we'll raise money for you if we can. We'll get you volunteers. We'll recommend you to press. We'll recommend you to partner groups. And then after election day, if you win, we'll help you figure out how to set up your office and how to transition to becoming an elected official. And if you lose, how do you put being a city council candidate on your resume? What do you do with the assets you just created? So it's a real soup to nuts support service. And so far, we've heard really positive things from the folks that we're working with about the kind of value add we're able to provide. My dog found her squeaky.
Yes.
Does your dog ever make appearances? Because we don't mind an appearance. I mean, really, this is the moment that could increase our viewership if we had like a great puppy moment. No,
just a little too big for me to scoop up.
Okay, all right.
If she comes by, I'll rearrange.
That's great. That we need that support. You know how to support people, so we could use it. No, I'm just kidding. So I do. It did raise two questions for me listening to you, though. So do you guys? I mean, you're obviously open to all people. Anyone could go to your website. But do you have a profile of people of someone or an age group or anything of someone who you really love to get in the mix? That's one thing. And do you guys ever reach out to anybody, or is it just people who come to you?
To your first question, Run for Something only works with people 40 years old or younger. We only work with first-time candidates or second-time. We're not working with incumbents moving up the ladder. We want to be people's first entry point into elected office. We do only work with people who align with Democrats. A lot of the positions we work with are technically nonpartisan, but we have a set of value statements we ask all of our candidates to abide by. And we only work with people running for state house, state senate, and below. So no federal office, no Congress, no governors, no LGs. It's really the building blocks. So like water board and library board and mosquito boards and coroners and everything else really local but meaningful. And as to your second question, we absolutely reach out to people. Some of it is folks who we find like, hey, this person wrote a really interesting op-ed, or they're an activist and they've been recommended by a group, or they've been recommended by a friend, or in a lot of places now, our alumni network, the folks we've endorsed and have gone through election days themselves, will recommend people from their networks. So in many ways, we're rebuilding the old boys club, but it's mostly young men and young women, young people of color, young non-binary folks who really look like the party we're trying to be.
So there was, when you talked about what you offer candidates, that list was long,
and
it kept going, and it kept going. And then I thought, like, seriously, how did anybody run for office? And this is like mosquito board. We're not even talking running for the Senate or a higher level or federal office, right? How were people able to run for office if they couldn't afford expensive lawyers that had expertise in setting up these campaigns and to put it all together? And so it really is dramatic, the how you shift that playing field just by offering something that was prohibitively expensive to other candidates. So when somebody calls you, and you can correct me, but I'm assuming they don't know all this stuff that they need to do. They think the idea is like, I'm going to run for office because I want to make a difference. They're not even thinking, holy crap, I got to write a campaign plan.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we've really discovered is that people don't even know the questions to ask. It's a campaign is a small business that explodes the day after election day. And most people have never set up a small business and don't realize that the hardest parts in many ways are going to be the things you don't even think about. Like if you want to file to get on the ballot and you have to submit some fund, like money, you have to pay for it. And often in many states there's a filing fee. How do you do that if you don't have a bank account? And you can't open a bank account until you have a campaign, but you can't set up a campaign until you have money. Like, how do you do this? There's a lot of logistics involved in a campaign that most people won't even cross their minds. So I do think it's one of the things that I have found to be the most illuminating over this work in the past 4 years is how many of the sort of unwritten rules that just by writing down, we've democratized access to. It's made it very cool.
Yeah, I like that. Democratized access, because that's what happened. That's why these candidates look different.
That's right.
Because the system was designed to exclude them.
The structures of our institutions, I mean that in terms of both the government systems, but also the parties and the campaigns, were not meant for people like us. And that's a really big problem. So we're trying to fix that however we can.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think it means? I mean, the youth. So I'm going to just ask a floater of a question here and see if you can grab something out of it, right? I just think it's interesting that, first of all, the youth turnout was off the charts in 2020, right? So somewhere, I mean, I've seen analysis. I don't think we have hard numbers, but a majority of people aged 18 to 29 or something like that turned out. Somewhere between 52 and 55% turned out in 2020, and that was at least a handful of points over what turned out in 2016. And then you've got these job approval ratings right now, and just to be clear too, this is from Tufts University. I didn't just make this stuff up, so I'm not just grabbing numbers out of the air, but that made a huge difference in, for instance, Georgia, where an estimated 188,000 more young voters backed Biden than backed Trump, and as we all know, that state was decided by a much narrower group of voters. Yeah. So and then Biden now is at about a 59-60% job approval overall from young Americans, and among college voters, he gets a 63% approval rating, and that in this particular poll was a 21-year high among college students. So when you think about that and what you guys are trying to do, how does that fit together for you?
Yeah, and then when I think about the youth vote, writ large, I think about a study that I saw from the Analyst Institute, which is like the gold standard of democratic, analysis. Is the name, which showed that the most effective way to get someone to show up at the polls, like the most meaningful tactic we can use to reach someone, is the relationship between the candidate and the voter, is a personal touch from that candidate to that voter. And then I think about all the candidates we work with who are personally knocking doors and making calls and having conversations one-on-one with folks, and who especially are able to enter spaces where there are young people, whether that's college campuses or gyms or what have wherever they are in these communities, whether it's online or off, and whose campaign staffs and volunteers are made up of their friends and their family and their classmates. The college students who run their campaigns out of their dorm rooms, or the recent grads and late 20s, early 30s whose entire campaign staffs are under the age of 35. Those folks have the relationships to reach these younger communities in ways that national and statewide candidates might not.
Joe Biden isn't reaching them.
No, Joe Biden's not knocking doors, and it's not a good use of his time. But I do think there's something really meaningful about having a candidate who understands you, who comes from your neighborhood. And what we've heard from organizations that are doing, especially organizations focused on organizing young people of color, is that local candidates who have a relationship and reflect that community are a really good sort of gateway for folks. You might not think that DC can deliver for you, although Biden seems to be doing pretty well so far. You might not think that the Senate is going to deliver for you. That might be true. But, you know, you play basketball with James. You know James from like, the YMCA every Saturday. He's running for city council, and he's promising to make your traffic commute a little bit lighter. You want to show up and knock some doors for James? Like, that's really meaningful. And especially for folks around the margins who maybe wouldn't be engaging in politics otherwise, over time, that really does build a relationship with the political process and with the Democratic Party.
This is something that we interviewed folks from the Texas Organizing Project, and they made the point to us because we were like, how do you get people involved in these local, you know, fights when it's not that sexy? And they were like, no, it's the local stuff that absolutely is sexy. That's the sexy stuff, right? So that people can see something happening right in their district, right in their locale. And, you know, and every voter who turns out for that local fight is a voter who's also turning out for the state and federal elections. So anyway, yeah.
So we've talked about how hard it is to run for office, how you've democratized that whole arduous process. Can you talk a little bit about the results? Like, let's talk about something less like, oh God, it's so hard to run for office. Now let's talk about like what happens when you do run for office and how successful you've been in winning races and what that means for those people and for those communities that they serve.
So our win rate over the last 4 years is somewhere between 40 and 45%, depending on when you measure it. You know, we have folks who the real races in the primary versus the general, that kind of thing. But that is so much bigger than we thought it would be. Most first-time candidates, studies have shown, lose. We, in fact, inspected maybe 10% to win. And the first year when we were upwards of 40% was remarkable.
Yeah, these are not traditional candidates. So you can't, logically, you don't think these people are going to be almost half are going to be winning.
Right. We are 510 winners so far across 46 states. We're still missing the Dakotas and maybe 2 other places. I can't remember off the top of my head. They are 55% women, 56% Black, Indigenous, or people of color, about 23% LGBTQIA+. They are Virginia House of Delegates former member Jennifer Carroll Foy, who's now running for governor. And if she wins, will be the first Black woman governor in America. She's remarkable. They are Representative Ana Escamani in Florida, who like single-handedly, along with her office, got more than 30,000 Floridians unemployment insurance. Representative Brianna Titone in Colorado, who was the first trans state legislator out there and also has been hustling so hard to get her constituents unemployment care. There are 5 or 6 members of the Texas State House who just earlier this weekend walked out and kept them from passing some of the most egregious voter suppression. It also includes Judge Lena Hidalgo in Harris County, who was the county executive when she ran and won in 2018 in a come-from-behind victory as the 27-year-old immigrant who nobody thought could win. She has, I believe she 10x'd the election administration budget in Harris County in 2020. She fought hard to keep voting open. She has changed the way they budget in such a way that provides like flood relief and emergency services to the community. And she's working hand in hand with the Harris County attorney, Christian Menefee, also a Run for Something alum, to empower him to sue the state when they pass egregious voter suppression.
Did they reach out to you when they first started thinking about running? Were you on the ground floor of those candidacies?
Some yes, some no. Some we got involved with after they got started. Some we got involved with before. It really varies. But all of them we've had sustained relationships with since the beginning of their first campaigns. And some deeper than others, certainly. You know, it varies the kind of campaign they need and the kind of help they need. But they are to a T remarkable. And I think it's what makes this work sustainable and what makes it really sexy for folks trying to engage in local politics is you have this really exciting person, they run for office, they win, they deliver, and then you feel the impact of that victory in such a way that it keeps you going for future fights. And that's what makes it powerful.
Have you guys seen, maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, but how much of a ramp up have you seen through the years in terms of the number of people who sort of access your services since you opened in 2017? Yeah. Is that right?
Yes, 2017. Okay. It was pretty steady year over year. 2017 to 2018 increased a little bit. 2018 to 19 increased a little bit. 2021 is on pace to be our best recruitment year yet. January 2021 was our best month ever, which blew my mind. I will say candidly, I was really nervous that we would see a bit of a downfall, like Democrats win, Trump is gone, so cool, work's over. As it turns out, a combination of winning in Georgia, which showed that anything is possible, and like a 31-year-old documentarian is now a United States Senator. He's one of us. And then the insurrection, which also illustrated, I think, how deep the rot is of the Republican Party and how much we have to fight back, how at risk our democracy is, has really lit a fire under folks. And that's compounded by the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, which also illustrated how important it is who's in charge locally, from school boards determining whether schools were open or closed to, police brutality and police accountability is a local issue for the most part. These budgets are determined by city councils and municipal governments. So I think all of that combined hit us with this perfect moment where we are now ramped up and able to help. We think we're going to work with probably about 400 candidates in 2021 and anywhere from 700 to 1,000 in 2022.
That's crazy.
That's cool.
Wow.
It makes
your side
heart
gig.
sing.
Her side gig.
Yeah,
her side gig. So to me, this is so exciting because, and at Daily Coast and on this podcast, we've been talking about next year being the most important election of our lifetime again, right? And we may be in a cycle where literally every single, because it's not liberalism that is at threat anymore. It's American democracy is literally at threat. And I think we're not giving the Georgia runoffs enough credit, Carrie, to building a lot of that momentum. So Amanda, what you're talking about is actually really, really kind of fascinating to me. And the big fear, obviously, 2022 is going to be, it's a midterm election. It's almost always, it's a base turnout election. And last time we had one of those after a first term president in 2010, we got our asses whooped, right? And we still have not recovered. We're still dealing with gerrymanders that were created after that 2010 election. So the fact that you talk about candidates being excited and we're still recruiting is another piece of evidence. If you're going to build a jigsaw puzzle, it's another piece that says, no, we're still active. And that's critically important because if we turn out, we're going to win. Yeah. We are our own biggest enemies as far as our ability to turn out our own people and keep them motivated and whatnot. So can you speak a little bit more about that, just if for no other reason to keep making me happy about this idea that people are really excited and engaged heading into these next two cycles, and the 19 off year and then 2022?
I do. I think when I look back at the cardinal sin of the Democratic Party, the original sin, if you will, it's that failure to invest in local elections in 2009, 2010. Like that laid the groundwork for the devastation that we are facing right now. And I do think that we are at risk of making the same mistakes. Like I am at my core an optimist, and the work that we're doing and the work that our organization is doing and that our candidates are doing gives me so much hope and so much, inspiration for the future. But I do see, especially from the donor base, quite candidly, some hesitation and some unwillingness to engage in places that not are viewed as like hot and cool, may not get you the ambassadorship, but are directly affecting structural power. Mm-hmm. So I do think we're at a moment now where, knowing how hard these races are going to be in 2021 and 2022, especially facing the voter suppression, the gerrymandering, the inevitable disinformation, the fact that these maps are going to be probably 10 times harder in a lot of places, both on the state legislative level and the congressional level. That work started 6 months ago. Like that, to flip a district, we need to do 18 months to 2 years of sustained organizing and sustained communication. And that means we need money to pay for canvassers, to start running ads, to engage in like deep relationship building. And I'm really nervous that the funds aren't there. So, I am very hopeful and very optimistic. I think we're going to have amazing candidates. We're going to have the best raw ingredients that you could ask for in terms of cooking up a victory in 2022. But if we don't have every possible resource they need, and if we don't have the sustained level of organizing and communicating that we know it will take to win against such an incredible opponent, which isn't actually the Republican Party, it's the structures that they have built. I don't know, man. it makes me very anxious. It makes me want to throw up a little bit, but I think it's possible. And I think it's a choice that we can make. We just have to make it today.
Don't throw up. We want the cute puppy moment. But although, if she threw up on air, I don't know, that could go viral too.
Carrie.
That has chances. No, let me just ask real quick. So
last question, Carrie.
People can donate to you, I assume. So please advertise where they can go to donate. But also, if you're talking about, do we have the resources? Are there other places, a top 2 or something that you're like, if you can give money, give to this place? Because I've been encouraging people to give to grassroots groups that are doing the voter registration and things like that. But I want to hear what you tell people about that.
Yeah, so I would say take your budget, whatever it is you want to give to political causes, and split it in half. Take half and right now set up a recurring donation to one of 3 places or multiple, depends how much money you have. Run for Something is a great choice. You go to runforsomething.net/donate. We welcome your contribution. State parties are a really good choice. I know it's not cool to fund Democratic state parties, but state parties do really meaningful work and are there year in, year out after the elections are over and do the kind of infrastructure building we need. Or look at an organization in your community that's working with either young people or communities of color or both. Both of those are places where we know that it just takes more time, it takes more people, it takes more work, and it pays off over the long haul. Set up a recurring donation to 1 or 2 or 3 of those sort of categories and go nuts. And that recurring donation will help them know they can plan. Take the other half and give it to local candidates, whether that's state legislative races or city council races or school board races. I promise you, every Senate candidate in 2022 is going to have all the money in the world. Every House candidate, even the governor's races, they are going to have every possible max out donation they need. They're going to have all of the, the rage donors, the people who just see the video on Twitter and click. But I know that the folks that listen to this podcast or are watching this now are smarter and more strategic and more intentional about your engagement. Give to the places that really your money will go further and your impact will be even deeper. And
it won't be pissed away. High-priced consultants and TV ads that don't change anybody's mind and haven't in years.
Nope.
And this is money that's actually going to go into building core infrastructure. And it's going to bring people into the process that a lot of them, like you talked about earlier, Amanda, probably weren't engaged already, but because they know somebody or it's their neighbor or their college buddy, brings them in. Once you get people voting, it creates lifetime habits of voting. Mm-hmm. So there's so much value in organizing on the ground. This is the real grassroots. It's not those Senate campaigns. Amanda's totally right. They're going to raise more money than God. You're probably going to give some money because we probably all are. But right now, a recurring donation to organizations like Run for Something is really I would say it's an imperative. I think you need to do it.
Thank you. I'm a little biased, but I agree.
I like the addition of state parties. It's not something that I have normally thought of, but I think that that's an important point, that the state parties are there. They don't just come and go, right? They're there all the time. So I like that addition.
Good. Yeah. I think it's something we don't pay enough attention to, but it's really an important part of the ecosystem. So
Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, I'm going to probably come calling again later in the year once you have some of your endorsements. So maybe we can talk about some of your endorsements. Maybe invite one of them on to join us so we can see the work that you're doing in actual, what it really looks like when you have a candidate who's working to get elected in the near future. So hopefully you'll be able to come back on. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so very much. And I think you got one of the coolest jobs. So congrats.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. This is my favorite topic. So literally anytime.
Thanks so much. Carrie, we have a couple minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think we were just moments away from a viral situation. That's all.
Oh, I heard that bark and it wasn't a cute puppy. That was a big bag of fluff that maybe would have knocked her out in her camera too. So although that could have been viral too.
That's the thing. That's the thing about puppies and kids, right? You get them on camera, you never know what they're going to do. They, come in behind you in the middle of a shot and all of a sudden, you're a star for 10 years on, whatever. So
you could sell the NFT later on down the line.
Exactly.
So her point though, and we're about to sign off here. I just want to make sure that the point is donate now. Recurring donations are incredibly important. Even if it's like $10 a month, it doesn't have to be a big number. It's actually better for the organization to have a consistent stream of money they can depend on, even if it's smaller than you giving $100 up front. Like that recurring donation is critically important. And run for something. You heard Amanda. Like how is that not some of the most incredibly critically important work being done in our movement today?
And whatever investments you're making now, 100% compounds anything that you donate next year.
Yes,
it compounds
absolutely.
The impact because they'll be registering voters. That network, that infrastructure will be available for the candidate you're trying to get elected next year.
The trained staff, it's so important. So that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Walter Einenkel for producing. Thanks to Amanda Littman for being our guest. Thank you, Carrie, for being my wonderful, amazing co-host. And all of you, again, thank you so much for listening. If you are enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailycoast.com or on Twitter at dailycoast. See you all next week.